Hello Renegade fans, now that 2020 is done and dusted, I can confidently say that without a doubt, it has been the year of the Rogue-lite. Well, it was something else entirely, but that's not as fun, so I do declare it otherwise. Steam alone saw the release of 360 titles tagged with Rogue-lite, so I have narrowed that down to just 52, one for each week of the year, so plenty to check out and let's get cracking. Korean publisher NEOVERSE is one to watch in the indie space, with Metal Unit being of interest. Set in a world devastated by monsters and aliens, don a powerful M-Unit suit and hunt these creatures down while seeking revenge on your treasonous sister. I do like the pixel art here, although to some, it may have committed a cardinal sin to have pixels of different sizes, but the action feels great with powerful abilities at your disposal. There's also meta progression elements in converting all equipped items into research points used to unlock new items and skills, all contributing to a compelling gameplay loop. It was meant to launch in 1.0 in December, but got pushed to 2021, although no date has been confirmed as of recording. An impressive looking roguelite strategy title is Urtuk the Desolation, where you and a party of adventurers explore the wasteland searching for a cure for a life-threatening mutation. The art style does stand out as well, looking a little bit Darkest Dungeon inspired, but the hex grid based tactical combat is a highlight where you can use the environment to your advantage. Early access is progressing smoothly and it is up to version 0.87, so perhaps a 1.0 launch will be sometime this year. Just covered a door in my video on upcoming monster taming games, where this action roguelite title allows you to summon and fight alongside your creatures and feels great to play, although there appears to be quite some runway before it hits full release. Don't want to spend too much time on this, so do check it out via the video linked above. The first of many roguelite deck builders on the list is NEOVERSE, a subgenre that has exploded in popularity due to the success of Slay the Spire. This features 3 playable characters with different outfits, but certainly falls on the Slay the Spire side of things in terms of core gameplay mechanics, relying on energy and shields for example. However, it does have an interesting mix of sci-fi and fantasy elements, some would say inconsistently mixed together, that there are several tweaks to the mechanics that makes it not just a simple clone. Korean developers strike again with Skul the Hero Slayer, an awesome looking pixel art roguelite platformer that is simply fantastic. It reverses gaming tropes on their head, where the Demon King has been captured by the Imperial Army and a lowly skeleton warrior must do what it can to save the king. The gimmick here is that our hero can gain a variety of new abilities depending on which Skul is equipped, with some great combat and boss designs as well. Similarly, they plan to launch in December, but that got pushed to January, coming out in just a couple of weeks, so it's as good a time as any to jump in, since the price is expected to go up when it does. I've already mentioned World of Horror in my list of the best pixel art horror games, so it's no surprise that it will show up here, being a turn-based RPG with one of the most wicked art styles out there. 1-bit pixel art is very difficult to get right, yet this developer does it wonderfully with his share of horrific Junji Ito levels of creepy designs, making it a must-play for horror fans. Another neat looking deck building roguelite is Iris and the Giant, but don't run away just yet, it does do something unique and different. While there is deck building combat, this has a little bit more of a puzzle game feel to it, since enemies are color coded and you can combo to destroy a whole bunch of them at once. Impressive progression system with an emotional story and theme makes this of interest. The no-brainer title has to be Curse of the Dead Gods, an action roguelite that looks impressive, where you delve into an ancient temple to seek riches, divine power and eternal life. Of course, there are a whole bunch of nasties and traps in the way, but for how great this feels to play, this certainly makes the cut. It also has been getting steady updates and is headed towards a 1.0 release sometime in 2021, so certainly pick this up. The next roguelite deck builder of interest is the Japanese-made Dimension Reign, another Slay the Spire-like title, but with an interesting two-protagonist setup. Controlling both characters, they need to work together to defeat the enemies, having to combo their attacks in an efficient manner in order to get the job done. You can gain extra moves through the brick system, rolling one attack into another, with combat simply just being so flashy and so satisfying. The main characters have different subclasses and meta progression, so it does keep you playing, with it getting steady updates, although I don't know when early access will be complete. Another impressive title in early access is Legend of Keepers: Career of a Dungeon Master, a roguelite RPG where you play as the bad guys. I love it when games allow you to play as the traditional enemies fighting against human heroes, with different dungeon masters specializing in different aspects, from monsters, magic, and traps. Think Reverse Darkest Dungeon and you get some idea, with lovely pixel art as well. It's currently on update 0.9.2, so it's getting close to 1.0, so it's another title to look out for this year. One Step from Eden did make my Game of the Year list, since it's basically roguelike Mega Man Battle Network, a long dormant RPG series which is unique in its own way, so it does warm my heart to see an indie developer bring back this series in spirit. Your objective is to battle through enemies and bosses to get to Eden, juggling attacking, casting spells and dodging enemy attacks all at the same time, with the pace of the action being very fast indeed. The bosses can be recruited as playable characters, so there's plenty of variety, but in roguelite fashion, this is one of the most challenging entries of the year, so if you do give this a try, you might want to allocate some time for this. I'm a sucker for pixel art, so For the Walk gets a mention, being another Slay the Spire style deck building roguelike. When I last checked in, the way that the cards were drawn was an interesting change, having no discard pile and where the whole hand is reshuffled back into your deck. So that did have some interesting strategic implications. Same steady updates, so I'll be waiting for the final product. I have to give a shout out to Singapore-made Gordian Quest, since this roguelite RPG is not to be missed. It mixes grid-based positional combat with deck building, where every character has their own deck, and it starts off with a pretty standard protect the village from the undead type of quest. As a fan of both Slay the Spire and Darkest Dungeon, the combination here is quite clever, with a nice variety in characters as well. In between battles, there are your typical RPG elements at play like a shopkeeper, blacksmith and such for upgrades, but perhaps is not so much of a run-based title as some of the rest, unless your entire party gets wiped. However, they did recently add a realm mode, which is more like your typical roguelike run-based structure, so it's a title of interest for sure. I love roguelite deck builders, so Knock on the Coffin Lid did get my attention, once again nailing the theme, setting, art and music. It's more RPG focused since you do only control a single character, with a variety of equipment and builds, including the usage of 2 shields, so of course I'm in. Since release, there have been weekly updates and patches, although the most recent post in December that indicate that some members of the team have left, so development will be slow going, but this is not an abandoned project.
One by one, life vanishes from this world.
If you're a fan of Darkest Dungeon like me, Iratus Lord of the Dead will be of interest since it's very similar, having turn-based positional combat, but rather than recruiting hapless mercenaries, you're instead building and reanimating undead monsters from the remains of your enemies.
All for my future kingdom.
There's a substantial customization, crafting and upgrade system for your units, your home base, and even for the titular Necromancer himself, but as someone who is eagerly anticipating Darkest Dungeon 2, this game did pull me over and is one of the best in the genre. I do believe that we'll be seeing an increasing number of roguelite, Souls-like titles combining 2 fan-favourite genres, with Arboria being one of the first examples here. It's a 3D action RPG with an interesting bio-organic look, having you delve into an ever-changing land in pursuit of the secrets of your tribe. It has been getting steady updates in early access, with updates like Queen's Fall, Reptiles, and most recently, Tainted Throne, all adding new content in the form of bosses, weapons, biomes, and so on, so momentum is looking good, and certainly check this out. Fury Unleashed is a roguelite platformer with a nice mix of ranged and melee weapons set, interestingly, in the context of a comic book, where you're collecting ink for the meta progression system. There is a focus on speed and action here, with a built-in combo system that rewards efficiently dispatching enemies, which is fun to do since the game feels great to play. I guess the one knock against it is that it's a little generic in terms of art and setting, so it doesn't really stand out, but the core gameplay itself is pretty fun and recommended from me. Monster Train got pretty high up on my Game of the Year list for 2020, so it will be no surprise that it makes an appearance here. It's a Slay the Spire-like deck builder, but with multiple lanes, so much variety in factions, heroes and units, an Ascension-like difficulty system, and always more new free content due to this developer being excellent, and has become one of my favourite indie games of all time, which I'm grateful for from 2020. As a pixel art fan, I cannot say no to Dracula Genesis, a little bit of a strange title, but as a prospect in the action roguelite space. Play as a genetically modified hunter in a post-apocalyptic world where, strangely enough, the big bad in all of this is Lord Dracula. Fight through monsters, demons, aliens, and robots, with a nice amount of weapon variety, a mix and match weapon upgrade system, interesting item pickups, and a ton of action. It has had 10 patches since launch in May 2020, so it's always good to see an early access game that is in active development, and I'm keeping an eye on this myself. One of these standout titles of the year is Gunfire Reborn, a roguelite first-person shooter from a company in Hong Kong, featuring unique heroes and abilities, the expected randomized weapons, and quite the challenge. I've seen people describe this as roguelite Borderlands, and while it isn't quite bad, to see a standout FPS in this space is pretty neat. Still in early access but has been getting steady updates, with it having crossed 1 million sales in December. This should turn out pretty well, with the 1.0 release planned for autumn 2021. An underrated roguelite title that would have made the Hidden Gems list is Rhythm Fighter, but I did want to save it for this video. It's a side-scrolling brawler with rhythm elements, so think Crypt of the Necrodancer, but with less directions and more like one-finger death punch, and you get the idea. The action roguelite farming sim Atomicrops also made it out of early access in May this year, perhaps a little bit stifled by its EGS exclusivity, but making its way to Steam in September. While it has farming as a theme, with the crop growing aspect being the most interesting part, this is really more of a bullet hell action roguelite, and I'm impressed with the look. Since launch, the developers have put out the Spring update as well as the Invasive Species most recently, so I'm happy to see the continued support for this game. Alright, so while Griftlands is technically not a 2020 early access release, it did come to Steam, which has resulted in it getting quite a fanbase, so it does have to be mentioned. It's yet another deck-building RPG set in a unique sci-fi world where cards come into play both in conversations as well as actual combat. Each character has their own unique campaigns, with the third character being added in November and putting out the Flourish and Metal update in December, so things seem to be progressing along nicely and I cannot wait for this to be done. Another underrated title is Colt Canyon, where you adventure through the Wild West in search for your kidnapped partner. While I do think that the art style has worked against it, I do think that it's beautiful, giving it a unique look unlike any other last year. The readability of this game may have been a little bit compromised as a result, but nonetheless, if you do love action roguelites, this is one to get. Curious Expedition from 2016 is another popular entrant in the space, with its sequel releasing in early access in June. It's an adventure RPG title taking place in the pseudo 19th century, where there are all sorts of fantastical creatures and adventures to be had. There's a choose-your-own-adventure style element with procedural storytelling, turn-based combat, and some impressive art, reminding me of Tintin for some reason. I do hold the belief that exploration in games is the most important part, and this takes that quite literally, so it's a no-brainer entry for sure. I think that Australian developer 1UP Plus Entertainment is a husband and wife team, with DungeonTop being a great entry in this space. It combines deck building with tactics combat, making you draw and place units on the grid, and then moving these to attack your enemies, and it gets on the board since it's unique. I do love the art as well, with there being free post-launch content, and I do love it when developers do this, so please support them if you can. Neon Abyss has been a standout title in 2020 that didn't quite jive with me, but I cannot really explain why. On paper, it's a roguelite platformer with unlimited item synergies, using a cool neon cyberpunk aesthetic, and even has familiars, so it should have totally been my jam. Perhaps it was how the dungeons were structured, with the key, grenades, and chest item upgrade system, or even that you could get bad eggs that did not hatch into any familiar, but I was pretty bummed that it did not stick. However, people do seem to love it, so maybe I'm missing something, but I'll give it some space and try again at another time.
Come in, come in. I'm looking for an intrepid fool, soul, to retrieve a few artifacts.
Speaking of dungeon crawling roguelites, Meteorfall Krumit's Tale is another interesting entry since I love the art style, very Adventure Time like, and has a card based combat system that's great. As you attack enemies or take items from the board, new ones will drop from above, with the option to scrap an item for gold, which factors into the long-term strategy. It's not super flashy in terms of animation, but I think that it's well done, so another title to check out for sure.
The Uberlich! Our green glowing world is dying.
Now I have a very close eye on Banners of Ruin since it might just shape up to be one of the best, although it might take a while, but do listen on. This is basically Slay the Spire but framed using warring animal houses, Game of Thrones style, where you're infiltrating a city in hopes of taking out their leader. It does have positional elements from Darkest Dungeon with a front and back row, with each individual character having their own deck and stamina per round. Absolutely love the art, with the biggest complaint right now being balance since it is roguelite hard, but we'll see if it gets there. One of the most popular roguelites of the year is UnderMine, another action roguelite title but having a very compelling progression system. As you delve into dungeons again and again, you do rescue NPCs and gain gold, which then feeds into an upgrade and unlock system. So if you are familiar with how compelling something like Rogue Legacy is, then you will certainly be interested in this. Tough boss fights, fun combat and interesting challenge rooms makes this another no-brainer. The Chinese title Warriors of the Nile is a roguelite tactics game which I love seeing more of, since most games default to platformer or action-adventure, where this game has you defeating various enemies on your way to the Serpent God in order to bring back the sun. I like the look, and the 3 character setup is great, having to balance melee, ranged and magic, which works fantastically well together for a tactics game. Another game that has found tremendous success is Risk of Rain 2, the follow-up to the original from 2013 and successfully making the transition from side-scrolling to 3D. This is one of the most challenging things to do in games, since, like Mario and Sonic before, the transition can result in bad games, so for Hopu Games to get it right on the first try is impressive, with not much more to say other than this is a must-play. One of the most promising titles in early access is Dreamscaper, another Souls-like roguelite but from the traditional action-adventure perspective, but looks simply amazing. It's wrapped up with the motif of lucid dreams, using these to conveniently explain what's going on, which I do appreciate in this genre. Some amazing boss designs, great action, items and keepsakes feed into the package, with the swelling music being highlights as well. it has been getting steady updates in early access, so development is moving along nicely, and with a targeted release in 2021, this is one to keep an eye on. Lost Potato is a smaller action roguelite title made by the developer of Space Gladiators Escaping Tartarus, another underrated gem, and it's a title where you cannot directly attack enemies. Rather, you do have to push them into hazards like spikes and hits, and it's a simple, smaller title that's worth your time. The original Rogue Legacy was the title that got me into indie games in the first place, so I do owe a lot to developer Celador Games, with the sequel of course being of interest. This was announced on April Fool's Day 2020 and released in early access 5 months later, being a bigger and better version of the first. While admittedly, it did launch in quite a sparse state, it has had one major content patch since then, titled The Far Shores, with the arcane Hellos expected later this month, with a lot more variety in classes and traits as well. Now that I'm more or less done with Hades, this might be my next early access roguelite of choice, so as always, stay tuned and I'll let you know when these big content patches drop. An impressive first-person roguelite shooter is Roboquest, looking awesome with the cel-shaded, almost Borderlands type art style, aided by the comic book text of the sounds that the guns make. It does have co-op as well, so maybe grab a friend, but for a fast, awesome feeling title, this is one to get.
Boom baby. Taka taka taka. Sick.
Another early access title, it is currently on version 0.3.0, although it was supposed to fully launch in 2021, so we'll have to see on this.
Rampage.
My most anticipated indie game of the year was Star Renegades, since it had an awesome pixel art style that I really love. It's a roguelite RPG where you play as rebels battling against a galactic empire of corrupted humans, aliens and robots alike, with an interesting strategic combat system that reminds me of the greats from JRPGs of the past. This, interestingly enough, has a nemesis system similar to Shadow of Mordor, implemented quite nicely with this genre, and is a cannot miss for turn-based RPG fans. The story of BPM Bullets Per Minute is a fantastic one, since this is the first commercial product from a two-person team and has impressed enough people to be a commercial success. As a rhythm first-person shooter, which is unique, being one of the first to market, where you can only execute your actions on the beat, leading to a fantastic game feel. It has an art style that combines Doom, Quake, and Devil Daggers, using character models and assets from the cancelled MOBA Paragon, but managed to become a fantastic title due to how good it feels to play. Very happy for the team, and to learn more, NoClip has a great podcast episode that I think you should check out. Hades probably needs no further introduction by now, easily making the top of many Game of the Year lists all over the world, mine included. And in a year of stories of developer crunch and abuse made public, this game really should have been a no-brainer across the board. Ars Technica, Destructoid, Eurogamer, IGN, Polygon, Time, US Gamer and more have given Supergiant the nod, and I have to say it's well deserved. The godlike roguelike, where you're fighting your way out of hell, balances fast action, variety in weapons, and one of the best adaptive storytelling systems into a masterpiece. Not to mention excellent art and music as always. While I have been seeing sentiment begin to turn on this game, even from some of you in the comments, citing a lack of variety, few secrets and a repetitive endgame, you cannot discount what an accomplishment this is. For a team of about 20 to go toe-to-toe and win against studios of hundreds of people shows the strength of the indie spirit. This game might just have been the title to push Supergiant over the edge into the not-so-indie territory, but the in-depth documentary, again from NoClip, about the development of this game does show their family spirit, showing that there is a better way to make games and to push the medium forward.
That was for last time.
Going Under has had the unfortunate luck of launching between two mega titles, but this action roguelite, which is a satirical take on startup culture, is excellently done. I like the aesthetics, very cartoony and weird, which seems to be in line with the vibe of this developer. Fun weapons in everyday office junk, challenging combat and meta progression will keep you playing, and thus have one of the best writing of 2020, and is a title that I, a millennial, identify with. Spelunky 2 has oddly gotten overshadowed to some extent by some of the other roguelites of the year, but for being the sequel to one of the fan-favourite roguelites, it gets on the list. Although, to be honest, I'm sure that it has already sold enough copies to be financially successful as well. The original freeware Spelunky was well received, whose popularity absolutely exploded with the release of Spelunky HD on Vita and Xbox Live Arcade, with this sequel coming 8 years after that. While it's very similar in mechanics and structure, the main character is now the daughter of the original Spelunky guy searching for her parents on the moon, which, strangely enough, has very Earth-like biomes and temples. Mechanics are tweaked just enough, with new items and enemies added, with its share of secrets, and there's a community aspect to this game which I do not see with other roguelites, and this period around launch is the best time to get in.
Darkness breeds a curse disdained. It's time to enter the Ring of Pain.
A very special shoutout goes to Ring of Pain, a roguelite deck builder that is not like Slay the Spire, which is a nice change of pace. As a dungeon crawler title, where you're able to rotate a carousel of cards to choose the encounters that you want, the so-called Ring of Pain, where there are enemies, loot, relics and more, having to strategically choose these as you delve deeper into the dungeon. I love the art style of this game, being one of the most striking, which makes it stand out, and according to the developer, there are further plans for more content this year, so one that I recommend.
Careful who you listen to. Darkness waits to prey on you. Observe the ring and strategize. Learn, adapt, or face demise. I have a gift on one condition. Quench the thirst. It's your audition.
Noita was a surprise hit in my opinion, since it garnered an absolutely massive following, and it's interesting since it's from a collection of developers who worked on Baba Is You, Environmental Station Alpha, The Swapper and Crayon Physics Deluxe. So no roguelite platformers, but the design chops show, and they managed to make an excellent one of these. The hook is that every pixel is simulated, from flammable gases, lava, ice, acid and more, with an interesting spell slinging system in wand upgrades. One of the selling points of roguelites is the built-in systems and how they interact with each other, where enemies need to obey the same rules as your character, which meshes together beautifully with the elemental simulation here. Traditional turn-based roguelites are difficult to come by these days, so when a good one pops up, I do have to give it a mention. Case in point being Crown Trick. All the expected elements are in, including procedural generation, grid-based, turn-based combat and permadeath, although it does buck the trend by having meta progression elements in blueprints and a currency that can be carried forward upon death. Like Noita, the focus here is on elemental interactions, where you can light pools of oil on fire or to shock enemies that are standing in water with lightning. Also, it does lock you into combat rooms and forces you to engage with the system, rather than having the option to simply run away as in other roguelites, with an awesome cartoony art style to round off the package. The original Goner was a cult classic, being another roguelite platformer which did have a memorable art style, and that seems to be the case with the sequel as well, not having done tremendously well on Steam but is of interest to roguelite fans. I guess the thing that works against this game is that it doesn't really explain all that much to you, leaving you to figure it out, but if you love exploring and tinkering with games and love this genre, I would recommend that you pay attention to this. One of the most impressive roguelites to make it out of early access is ScourgeBringer, having great pixel art, satisfying combat, compelling upgrades, and a good amount of challenge. This was in early access around the same period as Hades, and in a similar manner, did make their roadmap and development goals very clear, putting out one significant patch after the next, each with their own patch video, which did make it very easy for me to cover, so thanks to the developers for that. Made my best indie games of the year, so a no-brainer for sure. The seventh sequel on the list is Ziggurat 2, a first-person title that's also in early access but just feels great to play. As I'm getting old, first-person games do often give me a headache, so I guess that it gives it even more weight when I put one of these on the list. It comes 6 years after the original, where the developer has had plenty of time in between to play around and experiment with different genres and games, from horror, Souls-like RPG, and even a farming game. So I do hope that they learned some lessons along the way and took those into making this game. You're a member of a magic order trying to protect humanity from the forces of evil, delving into procedurally generated dungeons in order to do so. Compelling meta progression adds to the package, and this too has steadily been getting updates since launch, so I'm excited to see how this turns out. An awesome smaller title is The Dungeon Beneath, a roguelite auto-battler which is one of the standouts in the space. I've mentioned in a recent video that, in hindsight, the mishmash of these two genres is very clever, with this game proving exactly why. Team composition and positioning are the most critical parts, with an artifact equipment system for you to build up your characters, and even though this is not in early access, it has also been getting content patches as well, adding new modes like a daily challenge as well as new heroes, so do show this indie dev some love. Kelipot has one of the best art styles that I have seen, looking absolutely gorgeous, and is a time and dimension warping title where you're searching for a cure for a mysterious plague of madness that has fallen over the kingdom. It's similar to Dead Cells in some ways, having the same core loop and action, although the inclusion of bullet hell elements in the boss fights is a change.
The age of Red Death is over. The age of conquest has begun.
Tainted Grail Conquest is one of the most interesting titles currently in early access, since it was initially planned to be a traditional RPG with a rogue-like mode, but that got completely spun off into its own title.
Through the unknown you will find the way. Through blood and pain, you will rise.
It's a deck building RPG based in Arthurian myths, this time in a cursed version of Avalon, with different classes, multiple builds per class, and a ton of skills, runestones, equipment, and more. It's getting close to a 1.0 release, so certainly one to check out.
When you face your destiny,
Shiren the Wanderer, the Tower of Fortune and the Dice of Fate is technically a game from 2010, being a Japan exclusive on the DS, and being part of the Mystery Dungeon franchise, which is one of the original roguelike series. It's kind of crazy that it got an enhanced re-release on Steam 10 years later, which, together with the Switch release, got 3 new dungeons. I did not play the original, so was happy to dive into this, and it's pretty sweet, although I'm still getting used to it, being more familiar with modern roguelites, but as always, fantastic pixel art, so I'm a fan. Metropolis is another favourite of mine, coming to us from South Korean developer Castle Games, and is a city building, deck building, tower defense roguelite, which is wonderful. If you enjoyed deck building elements but wanted something a little different from the dungeon crawler, this is your game, where you lead a pack of rats in establishing their metropolis while fending off enemies. There's a whole economy system, structures to build, troops to recruit, and so on, with unlockable advisors and cards which keeps you playing. Really nailed that gameplay loop and was a wonderful title to round off the year. Looking ahead, 2021 has a couple of neat entries in the space, chief of which has to be Darkest Dungeon 2, which appeared in my most anticipated upcoming Indie Games of the Year video, although having run through this list, we do have a number of early access titles fully releasing, so that's exciting. As always, I do have a couple of aces up my sleeve, so stay tuned for the show. To see more of the big picture, check out these awesome videos, and I will see you after the jump.